Okay, again, a warm welcome from EFI. Thank you for coming and joining this ThinkForest webinar on From Nature Restoration to National Forest Plans, Restoration Plans. I'm Helga Pülzl, EFI's Assistant Director for Policy Support, and I'm very honored to open this event today. At the start, I will talk a little bit about a couple of housekeeping issues and then introduce our main speaker and also the agenda. First of all, I would like to make you all aware that we will be recording this webinar, and later on we will make it available on our YouTube channel quite soon. For questions, please submit your questions in the chat, in the Q&A box, and don't forget to include also who you are, name your organization, and whom you actually ask the question to. This would be really helpful to deal with the questions later on. For social media, please don't forget to tag us with the ThinkForest hashtag if you're posting. We would very much welcome that. And finally, for captions, I would like to make you aware that you can show captions, meaning subtitles, also on Zoom. You can turn it on your own computer, and it's found next to the Q&A box, and only you will see the captions. I will now give a brief overview of the agenda of the event and introduce Elisabeth Schatzdorfer, our main speaker today. Elisabeth will be speaking about forward-looking forest restoration aspects, and she will introduce a very large project, Superb, and I will say something in a moment. After this, we will have an exciting panel discussions on challenges and opportunities to creating these forest restoration plans. And we have participants from different organizations. So from the European Commission, from the National Parks and Wildlife Service in Ireland, from the Ministry of Climate and Environment in Poland, and from the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries in Croatia. So quite a diverse list of participants for the panel. And the panel will be moderated by our communication manager, Gesche, who will then introduce also everyone. And I will close with some remarks at the end of the event. But now let me say a few words about our main speaker, Elisabeth. Elisabeth is a forest scientist, and she's also a natural resource management expert and ecologist. She joined EFI around 5 years ago as the head of resilience program, but after maternity leave, she came back as a principal scientist to Bonn. In her work, Elisabeth investigates strategies and also alternative management options to increase resilience and also the functionality of forests and forest landscapes to protect and restore biodiversity. But most importantly, Elisabeth at the moment coordinates a 20 million euro project called Superb. And Superb's main aim is actually to implement large-scale forward-looking restoration activities together with local communities, landowners, authorities, and also other partners. The project's second aim is, of course, to collect practical and scientific knowledge to make restoration successful and make it accessible for all restoration actors. And we would be curious to learn more about the main lessons that Elisabeth will be sharing about her Superb project in a moment. So Elisabeth, the floor is all yours. Please put your presentation online so that we can listen to your talk. A warm welcome also from my side.
Thank you very much, Helga. And I'm at the moment trying to share my screen. Share this one and make it full screen. So, and I guess now it should work.
Yes.
Yeah, good. Okay, thank you very much for having me. Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Helga. And welcome also from my side to everyone for this presentation, Forward-Looking Forest Restoration, Lessons Learned from Superb, and in fact, a bit beyond. Before I talk about forest restoration, I would like to quickly remind us on the reasons for forest degradation and biodiversity loss. Europe has a long history of human land use. We know that forest area was reduced from naturally about 80% to 35%. We have only 3% primary and old-growth forests left, and we have had large-scale extinction of large predators, which now causes a problem with high herbivore populations. Also, active forest management plays its role. It's altering tree species diversity, introduces non-native tree species, it impacts soil, light and water regime. It removes habitat trees, and also the deadwood quantities are much less in these managed forests. Pollution largely used to be a problem, although nitrogen deposition still is a problem in some areas. Climate change truly is a current very big degradation driver, as well as biological invasions. When it comes to the why we do forest restoration, one can look at this question from a number of different angles. We do it to restore or improve biodiversity through, for example, increasing structural, functional, and landscape diversity or species, or to restore habitats. We may also want to restore or strengthen the provision of forest products and services. We want to restore the resilience through diversity, complexity, and adaptive capacity, or we may want to restore after a natural or human-caused disturbance, or to primarily let nature run its course and have natural processes prevail. It is important to note, however, that not all objectives can be fulfilled to a maximum extent at once. There are always trade-offs. Before I come to the how of forest restoration, let's look at the internationally recognized 10 principles for forest ecosystem restoration, which have been developed under the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration 2021 to 2030. And by the way, EFI, as the coordinator of Superb and Transform It, and also having the Secretariat of the Integrate Network, is a supporting partner of the UN Decade. The 10 principles provide a broad guidance on how and for what purpose to do restoration. I would like to highlight the emphasis on broad engagement and the benefits for nature and people, which implies a consideration of the socioeconomic dimension of restoration and the broad view on ecosystem services. Also described by the UN Decade are the 5 components of the restoration process and their cross-cutting subcomponents. Similar to Superb, the broad engagement and the adaptive management are put at the center, which also means integrating them into every component or phase of the cycle. This is an ideal system, obviously, but something we found from investigating hundreds of past restoration projects. Too often, restoration projects stop already with the implementation phase due to lack of long-term planning and funding. Although we know that forests often require aftercare and adaptive management, particularly when different ecosystem services are to be balanced and when environmental conditions and societal expectations are changing, which they clearly are. The good news is that we found in Superb that the silent majority of the general public in Europe supports forest restoration, preferably through tax money and policies. But there are regional differences. We found, for example, more positively perceived impacts of forest restoration at the country level in Eastern European countries. Generally, lower support was found in Northern and Central Europe and also in our demo regions, meaning in areas close to particular restoration challenges. Negatively perceived impacts on perceived forest benefits concern, for example, the supply with firewood, mushroom picking, or space for hunting or timber production. While particularly positively seen were the aesthetics of the forests, the creation of habitats for species, and space for outdoor social and recreational activities. whether in reality they can always, or latter can always be combined with the primary restoration objectives is questionable. The perceived negative impacts must be taken certainly very seriously, not to risk conflicts and a decreasing general support for forest restoration. Therefore, it is essential to involve the public view and consider room for compromises. To find compromises, it's very good and important to be aware that there is a large toolbox of restoration measures from tree to landscape scale that can be chosen from to support different restoration approaches and objectives. In Superb, we applied this diverse toolbox in our 12 large-scale demonstration areas that dealt with very diverse forest degradation issues in diverse ecological and socioeconomic contexts to restore resilient socio-ecological systems. Approaches and objectives were very diverse across these 12 demos, ranging from the introduction of broad-leaved hedgerows in an intensive pine plantation forest system in Le Landes in France, to converting spruce plantations to mixed natural forests, elder galleries, and high elevation tree and shrub vegetation in the Făgăraș Mountains in Romania, with the long-term goal to actually establish a national park. In most cases, we wanted to improve the current management system and to integrate biodiversity conservation, not completely change the land management and therewith disrupt existing value chains and income streams. But in every case, or in any case in Superb, our approach has been guided by the idea of transformative change instead of disruption. For the planning and monitoring of such restoration projects, two big questions are which goals to set and which indicators to use. In Superb, we deliberately left this to our demo areas to decide upon based on their local and regional objectives and requirements, and which they develop together with the stakeholders and which go beyond biodiversity-related indicators. Now for the nature restoration regulation, and in the absence of a common method for assessing the condition, functionality and ecosystem service provision of forests, the European Commission has decided to set a general obligation to reach good condition according to Article 4 and to enhance biodiversity in forests according to Article 12 of the Nature Restoration Regulation, and measure the fulfillment of latter obligation on the basis of 8 indicators, one of which can be dropped. However, to demonstrate improvement and to set targets is an issue, since this is now legally binding. And most of these indicators have their issues. I will now give a few examples from Superb and beyond. Starting with forest birds, the one mandatory indicator. And please mind that in Superb we did not exactly use the common forest bird index, but forest bird richness shown in green and other bird species in blue. On the x-axis you can see restoration stages measured as chronosequence from newly restored to the expected end state. In the left graph you can see the French demo, and you can see that we did not observe a trend either for forest birds or non-forest birds across the restoration stages. And on the right side, in the Romanian demo, with the goal of establishing a national park, both groups even showed a decline with restoration stage. Concerning soil carbon, we also receive quite a mixed picture from our demonstration areas, here shown across 4 demos, where, for example, mixed mature forests not necessarily show the highest soil carbon stocks. Another indicator of the nature restoration regulation is the share of forests dominated by native tree species. Therefore, I would like to take a look a bit at its counterpart, non-native tree species. In a previous pan-European project, Cost Action and Next, we carefully investigated the distribution, benefits and threats from non-European, non-native tree species. Positive effects concern climate change adaptation, afforestation of the degraded sites, new products and services or higher productivity, while on the negative side, such species are often considered invasive and thus face restrictions. They may have unknown pests and pathogens, which can also have effects on native tree species. There may be problems with forest reproductive materials and also market limitations. In the Life Resilience project, superb colleagues have investigated the resilience of forest ecosystems dominated by established invasive tree species. And they also looked at options of fighting such established invasive alien species. Here the example of American black cherry, Prunus serotina, with the distribution in the Netherlands in 1963. And after spending about 200 to 500 million euros over the last 50 years, the distribution looks like this. Now, when they investigated mature Prunus serotina stands in Belgium, they found a strictly native succession. Nothing but native trees and shrubs in the undergrowth. Similarly, they also found mature forests of oak and chestnut under 140-year-old 70-meter-high eucalyptus trees in Spain, or all native undergrowth under trees under Tree of Heaven in Romania. The reason is that many of these widespread non-native tree species have strong pioneer characteristics, and in a mature stage have a rather light canopy, which allows native, more shade-tolerant tree species to grow and establish themselves. Now, I think these are very good examples that restoration not only necessarily needs a lot of money, but also time, and that non-native trees can indeed also offer opportunities for forest resilience under climate change. Another indicator from the Nature Restoration Regulation, and certainly a very important aspect of forest landscape restoration, is forest connectivity. It allows connecting population, allows the movement across landscape and the migration of species, and thus is very important for climate change adaptation. Connectivity can be analyzed in many different ways. Connectivity can be structural, where the position, size, and architecture of its elements, for example, patches or corridors, is considered, as shown in the left, in the example of an agricultural and a forest-dominated landscape. Or connectivity can be functional, which means considering how a particular organism perceives such structure, as shown with this resistance surface on the right side. It is important to note what is functional and connected for one species may not be so for another species. And therefore, the focus of science today lies on functional connectivity, while in the Nature Restoration Regulation, a structural connectivity indicator is used. Connectivity is also relevant for trees, as also trees can move. But in the context of forward-looking adaptive restoration, the question is, are they fast enough for climate change? This top graph shows the slow natural recolonization of oak over the last 10,000 years. But climate change causes a much faster shift in the area where a particular tree species can grow well. If you compare it with the predicted shift of species suitability from the current climate to a projection of for later this century in the bottom two graphs. Also, the IPCC is very clear. The migration of tree species is slower than the pace of climate change. Research also shows that assisted tree migration can preserve the European forest carbon sink under climate change, while without assisted tree migration, so choosing the most suitable provenance, the carbon sink and resilience of forest is very likely to go down. And we know that in several European countries, forests have already turned into sources, like in Germany, Austria, and Finland. Therefore, we have recommended in a policy brief to use a strategic blend of passive and active restoration, to consider assisted migration as risk mitigation measure, to redefine European native tree species according to the potential future ranges, and to set realistic restoration targets that can be achieved, because restoring the historical natural vegetation is not realistic under climate change, and passive restoration alone will also not suffice. For this reason, in Superb, we have developed an app, the Seed for Forest app, for the selection of tree species, provenances, and mixtures, including climate suitability information of 38 European and non-European tree species, and also provenance recommendations for 24 tree species. All of this and much more, and also from beyond Superb, you can find on this newly launched Forest Knowledge Gateway, which is dealing broadly with the topics of forest restoration and integrative forest management, and offers hundreds of resources and also 4 stakeholder-specific knowledge pathways. It has online guidelines. It links to a marketplace, which has been developed by Superb and the sister project, marketplace for restoration projects. It offers an AI translation and also an AI bot. Now, to conclude on forest restoration, forest restoration should and typically does pursue multiple objectives. We can rely on a diverse toolbox of restoration approaches and measures, the use of which should be adapted to local ecological and socioeconomic conditions and objectives in order to be effective and sustainable. There can be synergies among different objectives and also among the restoration of different ecosystems. I had no time to go into that, but there's certainly no silver bullet for optimizing restoration. We need to be careful with suggestions that if we restore biodiversity, all other problems will be automatically solved, or also with thinking that if we return to a natural tree species composition and only let nature do its job, it will be the best for climate change adaptation. A holistic landscape restoration is important, as there we involve stakeholders in setting the restoration targets, because there is not a single universally agreed endpoint for forest restoration. And since restoration in the context of global change and evolving societal demands is likely or is like aiming at a moving target, we need to approach, or we need to follow a forward-looking adaptive forest restoration where, among other things, tree species adaptation, assisted migration, and possibly also to a certain extent non-native tree species will have to play a role. And with that, I would like to thank you for following this presentation, and I give back the floor to Helga.
Thank you very much, Elisabeth, for this inspiring talk. I have to say that I think you gave us a lot of food for thought. And I especially like that there is so many ways of doing restoration, but that we are basically on a marathon now, and it's not a short-term objective that we have ahead. With this, I would like now to give the floor to Gesche and the panel. Gesche Schifferdecker is our communication manager, and she will now introduce the panel and lead the panel discussion. So welcome, Gesche, and welcome to your panelists. The floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Helga, and thanks a lot for the presentation, Elisabeth. We will definitely pick up some points also in the panel. Now I would like to start introducing our panelists, and I will start with Jenni Roche. She works as a restoration planning ecologist at the National Parks and Wildlife Service. And she has in Ireland, and she has over 20 years of experience in nature conservation across the public sector, consultancy, and also research. She is now working to develop Ireland's National Restoration Plan, the NRP, following the EU Nature Restoration Regulation. And she's also developing a program for forest restoration projects, and we will hear more about that later. I will continue with Katarina Tumpa, who works at the Croatian Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries. And there she leads the Department of Forest and Genetic Resources Protection. She holds a PhD in forestry on the topic of genetics and tree breeding from the University of Zagreb. She's also currently the national focal point for the Forest Network, for the Integrate Network, and for the Forest Europe Ministerial Conference. So we've been meeting her in several occasions. And on the national level, she is a member of several working groups on biodiversity and nature conservation. I will continue with Florian Claeys. He's a policy officer at the European Commission, working on nature restoration and nature credits within the Directorate General for Environment, so DG ENV. And he contributes to implementing the nature restoration regulation and to also developing an emergent framework for nature credits. And he's doing that in close collaboration with the member states, with stakeholders, and also international organizations. So we will also hear more about that. He has a background in climate, biodiversity, and land use policy, and he's committed to bridging science, finance, and policy to make investment in nature a driver of resilient and shared prosperity. So we will learn more about his objectives there. And then our fourth panelist is Lukasz Rejt. He was director of the Nature Conservation Department in the Ministry of Climate and Environment in Poland. And since 2024, he has been a counselor at the Ministry of Climate and Environment with expertise in biodiversity conservation and nature resource restoration. Currently, he is dealing with issues related to the preparation of the national plan for the restoration of natural resources. And he is also, and that's another reason why we invited him, of course, busy with the implementation planning of the objectives of the NRR, the Nature Restoration Regulation. Yeah, welcome to the panel, the four of you. I would like to start with a bridging question between the presentation that you have just been seeing and your expertise. Also what we read in the comments when we posted the webinar, there is a lot of debate around the EU Nature Restoration Regulation and the plan, the preparation of the NRPs. The National Restoration Plan is ongoing, so it's very urgent, and the scale, of course, of the EU NRR is quite big. So I was wondering, how can the latest science that you've just been seeing in the presentation, particularly also from large projects like Superb, how can the science be more effectively integrated into the design and also the implementation of the national restoration plans, rather than, because that's not what we want, remaining on the only on the research level? So after listening to Elisabeth, and I know many of you also have a background in science, right? So after listening, do you have any suggestions or ideas? Who wants to go first? Yes, Florian.
I can start to break the ice, if you're okay.
Wonderful.
Thanks a lot for the invitation, and it's a real pleasure to be here with you discussing about forest restoration, which is indeed one of my favorite topics since quite a long time now. Yeah, so I would like to say that the NRR is not only an EU regulation that needs to be implemented like in a very bureaucratic way. I think it's much more than that. It's really a framework for learning by doing on how to do restoration, and that's why I think that the latest sciences can be really at the core of its implementation, including the national restoration plans. So I think that the NRR is quite clear that there is not a single path for restoration, and that's a large variety of restoration measures of approaches. So it recognizes that restoration is not just a blueprint that you need to apply in a very systematic way, but on the contrary, something very dynamic that can be evolving continuously through evidence and experience. So to be a bit more clearer, projects like Superb and other forest research projects can be directly integrated in the national restoration plan. So there is various fields proposed by the informed format, be it at the national level, so in the part A, or at the level of all sector-specific approaches. So that's called the part B in this informed format, but also directly also as a restoration measure, so a measure on its own, and the part C, which allows for a lot of bottom-up opportunities. What is important also in terms of science prospect is that this format and all the national restoration plans are digitally, meaning that they are quite digitally advanced. All the information that can be provided in these plans first can build on existing information. So we have tried to ensure that there is a minimal burden and that all information already provided can be reused. But you also continue with time, meaning that all this information could be also the basis for future research and then continue to evolve with that. And then beyond the national restoration plans, there is also some areas where research would be extremely important is on the monitoring methods and all the guiding frameworks, meaning that be it at the level of the indicators, but also on the various forest habitats and beyond habitats, all forest ecosystems. There is a lot of areas where scientific evidence will be reflected and that will then ensure that there is some proper links between the planning, the monitoring, the reporting, and then the revisions. So it's something very dynamic, based and guided by science, and that will go in a very positive way in the future.
Thank you very much for this very constructive comment. And indeed, it was once the National Nature Restoration Regulation was launched, of course, we also had internal discussions, and one of the reasons why we set up the Forest Knowledge Gateway was also to provide this very practical guidance. Also, that we developed the idea before the NRR was even under discussion, but we had the intention to really provide the scientific knowledge in a way that it's practically usable for policymakers and also, of course, practitioners. Lukasz, you have an immediate response. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, if I may add something. Of course, such projects are very important, but the first thing, we must know about it. Because if you have no information about such a project, about the effects, about the fundings, there's no chance to put it in the NRP, to use the knowledge. And sometimes, especially for the experts from governmental authorities or governmental institutes, they probably have no knowledge about such a project and the findings from this. So it is the first step to make this project and the findings much more widespread, especially in the governmental level. And as one another step, maybe it will sound weird, but also such information about the findings from such a project, especially concerning this particular forest or wetlands or something like that, should be known, interesting, and understandable for the policymakers and politicians. Because in the end of the process, the NLP is accepted by the governments, by politicians. So without the knowledge we can bring to them as this final element of accepting the NLP, it will be very hard to convince them.
Thank you very much, Lukasz. Very true. And it's very often about kind of translating the knowledge into a proper language, and also translating the English, the knowledge provided in English in the scientific context into in the national languages, so that actually the people from the ground can also have access. Yeah, absolutely agreed. Jenni, please.
As Lukasz said, I think dissemination is absolutely key to increasing the impact of a research project. And the Superb project has been strong in that regard, because the events have been, in many cases, targeted towards the National Restoration Plan. And there was a deliberate effort made to link in with people working in that area. So the project will really benefit from an awareness of what the data gaps are, which can be highlighted by people working in that space. And it was obvious from Elisabeth's presentation that the Superb project has really touched on a lot of the indicators which are used under Article 12 of the NRR on forest ecosystems. I'm working on Article 4 of the NRR, which relates more to the protected forest habitats listed under Annex 1 of the Habitats Directive and the protected species. And in that area, the data gaps that we're encountering are in relation to habitat mapping and habitat condition, the mapping of areas that would be suitable for habitat re-establishment, and also detailed connectivity mapping. So I think it's important for researchers to be aware that there are data needs around those issues, and also individual member states will have very specific needs. So it's important for researchers to know what the data gaps are within their own countries as well.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jenni. And of course, it's also important that we have these type of events like today where we can actually address those needs, and then they might be also picked up in a funding program, for instance. Katarina, I know you work in networks like Forest and also Integrate, where it's one of the purposes to actually bring the knowledge from science and practice together. So based on your experience, how do you work with the latest science, and how are you planning to integrate it into the development of the national nature restoration plans?
Thank you. Well, I think that, and I really like what Elisabeth mentioned and also said, is we need to be very realistic. You know, my expertise is maybe more towards genetics, and we have to keep in mind that genetics is a long-term game. The whole NRP topic, it might seem like it's very far away, you know, 2050, 2030. In terms of genetics, that's nothing, right? Trees grow for hundreds of years, and climate change is definitely outpacing them. And I think that what I really liked about Elisabeth's presentation and Superb in general is that no option is being rejected straight on, right? If we have to consider using non-native species, perhaps it's something we will have to consider. If we have to consider assist the gene flow, perhaps this is something that we will have to consider, obviously on a nation-to-nation basis. It's not the same issue in Croatia to, let's say, northern Sweden or southern Sweden. And I think that from Croatia's perspective, you know, we have at the same time, we have the blessing of having a very biodiverse forests, but in a way also it's a curse, because we're very focused on preserving what we have in a condition that we have. And as Elisabeth also said, this is not realistic, okay? Especially in Mediterranean area that will be the hardest hit with heat and drought and newly upcoming pests that are spreading mostly from Asia. And so what I would like to see in Croatia's, but in general in natural restoration plans across Europe, is this open-mindedness towards all options. Of course, we have to try and really try to preserve the naturalness of our forests. But if it means not having trees because none of our trees can survive it, then we need to be open to maybe even hybridization. Let's say European beech. There has been some research, I believe it was in 2023, between European and Oriental beech. And those hybrids have shown to be very, very tolerant to heat and drought. I'm not saying this is what we need to do, but we have to be open-minded to it, because 2030, 2050, really it's around the corner. And our climate change can only get, unfortunately, worse. So my overarching idea would be keep an open mind, try to protect the naturalness of your forests, but be realistic that maybe you will not be able to, because I believe Elisabeth said we only have 3% of old growth and primary forests left. So we've already, unfortunately, destroyed most of it. So try to keep what we have, but be open to implementing new ideas, so to speak.
Thanks, Katarina. And of course, there it works very well with the science, because the science itself,
Yes.
it is open-minded, and it is it doesn't have well, it has, of course, specific question that it asks, but it has this this idea that we can actually try different things and see if they work out, right?
And I think we have to try them.
Mm.
Unfortunately, in some cases, we will have to try them. It's no longer idea of, there was a very nice graph that Elisabeth showed how the distribution of species is shifting. So this is something we have to keep in mind. The species you might want to have, you probably won't be able to. So be open to accepting, so to say, new species, and with that, changing the whole paradigm of your forestry and, unfortunately, your nature.
Yeah, and the entire ecosystem. Yes.
Yes.
Lukasz, and then we would go on with a new question.
Yes. I'm sorry, but I think that the Katarina said very important thing. In restoration law, we have two pillars. One is this kind of Natura 2000 approach, and the second is the ecosystem approach. And ecosystems are changing all the time. And on the other hand, we are trying to keep the situation in the habitat types as we have now. So at the same time, it's not possible. And sometimes we must make a decision what to do, what is the most important. And if we want to have an answer on these climate changes, it's also affect the ecosystem changes. And sometimes we'll be able, as Katarina said, to prevent it on this site level, on this habitat type characteristics and conservation status. And it's very important.
Thanks, Lukasz. And that means that's a reference to aiming at the resilience of the ecosystem and not at the resilience of specific tree species, right? Okay, thank you very much. That was a very nice introductory round. I would now like to go back a little bit to the our preparation from the perspective of the law. So starting with the question to Florian, which is related to the Nature Restoration Regulation, which really sets ambitious and also legally binding targets. But we know that the member states, and that was also something that was criticized in the development, are starting from different ecological and also administrative baselines, which is a huge challenge, but also an opportunity. And we were wondering, how does the Commission plan to ensure that the natural restoration plans are consistent and also comparable to a certain extent, while also allowing for some national flexibility and potentially also innovation. So what is your perspective on that?
Yeah, indeed, it was quite a challenge to ensure that on one hand you can have a kind of EU approach which is consistent, comparable, while in the same time dealing with the diversity, first of national circumstances, but also the real biodiversity on the ground, meaning that there is there is no silver bullet solution, so one solution that can fit all solutions, so all circumstances. So what has been proposed in the regulation and then reflected in this uniform format is to have this, respecting this common backbone, but allowing as much as possible all the national flexibility and the national autonomy. So meaning that even if there is some objectives at the EU level or at national level, then it is fully enshrined in the subsidiarity principle, meaning that member states are free to choose what measures they want to implement, where and when. And all the purpose after that is to do this planning, and they need to follow a set of rules to ensure that these plans can be comparable and can be quite uniform from one country to another one in terms of process and then in terms of structure. And that's why the proposals of this uniform format that has been developed, co-developed, I could say, with member states and stakeholders through the expert group and the committee that are foreseen under the nature restoration regulation. So this uniform format defines a bit the core component that all plans must contain, like on ecosystem condition, on the quantification of targets, on the mapping, the indicative mapping, on the descriptions of measures and so on. But it's also reflecting all the diversity and all the flexibility that are proposed in the NRR. Starting with the definition of restoration. So you have under Article 33 the fact that restoration measures basically is all the processes, be it active or passive, because Elisabeth has mentioned that in some cases the passive restoration may not be the most appropriate and you need some active restoration. But yeah, it's capturing everything that can be considered as restoration, provided that it's contribute to the recovery and ecosystem. And then these measures, and that there is also, well, there is no definition of measures in the plan. So there have been a kind of shared understanding that measures can be both a project, for example, at a very local level, or something larger, like even a national program targeting one type of ecosystems, and that can be also considered as a restoration measures. We have tried to reflect that in this part C of the uniform format, and then ensuring that there is a minimum set of information so that it can be aggregated and can be also understandable, meaning, for example, to which targets and obligation these measures will contribute. Well, that's the first entry that can allow to have some consistency, some comparability, and then also to structure a bit all the ecosystems of actors, ecosystems of stakeholders, in order for them to highlight how they want to contribute to these targets or this obligation. Then also on the forest one, specifically on the forest ecosystems, there is also a set of indicators based on existing methodologies shared with member states. There is the Common Forest Bird Index, and there is a set of indicators like the deadwood, the structure of forest, the connectivity of forest. So some of them have been explained by Elisabeth. These ones are mainly usually based on Forest Europe methodologies, so they are quite known by member states, and that already allows kind of comparability and the comparisons, still keeping also this importance of national diversity. And then the last point to ensure the comparability and this consistency is also with time. The regulation is proposing also all a timeline of implementation with the plans, the monitoring, the reporting, still with some flexibility, meaning it is at least 6-year cycles, meaning that in some cases, especially for member states that have a 10-year based forest inventory, for example, they can go for a 5-year cycle, which is either to fit with a 10-year basis. So there is also this a bit this time dimension, which also a good driver to ensure comparability and consistency. And that also reflects a bit the iterative and collaborative nature of the nature restoration regulation, meaning that with this implementation timeline, the stepwise approach, meaning that the first plans can only focus on the 2030 objectives and just put the rest until 2050 limited to a strategic overview, can also help to, on one hand, reflect that member states are not starting from the same entry point, that they are quite diverse and not exactly the same ecosystems, while in the same time ensuring a process that allows to work as an union, basically.
Thank you very much, Florian. I have several other questions, of course, for the other panelists, but we had a question in the chat from Aris Janssons, and that is linked to the budget of the EU. So what he wrote is that the European Court of Auditors in 2025 defines that the cumulative reduction of EU budget purchasing power is down by 33%. And he was asking, in the light of this, where should the restoration priorities be placed? It's a bit of a challenging question, I'm aware, but I think this is the worry of many of the participants also of this webinar. So maybe you have a quick response to this. Florian, you're muted. Sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, there
Thanks.
is various element of replies on that, which are proposed by the NRR. I will say that on the first aspect, you need to look a bit at the general objectives of the nature restoration regulation. It's true that one objective of restoring nature is indeed this biodiversity recovery, so a kind of ecological objective, but it's not the only one that are highlighted by the regulation. So there is also this climate dimension, this land disaster neutrality, no, the land degradation neutrality, and land and disaster prevention. There is also the food security as enhancing food security in terms of general objectives. Then when you're looking a bit more in the Article 14 and 15, which is really framing how to prepare the national restoration plans and then how what should be the content, there is also various provisions that should be considered. So there is one article, one paragraph which is highlighting that member states have to identify synergies between nature restoration and climate change adaptation, mitigation, and disaster risk prevention, as well as land degradation neutrality, and then prioritize restoration measures accordingly. So that's already a first orientation to have in mind. There's also some synergies to be established with agriculture and forestry. These provisions is fully reflected in the setting of the plans. So that's provide a bit some elements of prioritization for member states, meaning that it's not only an ecological objective, but also a socio-economic one, meaning that you need also to work on the optimization of the functioning of ecosystem services, capturing all the dimension of sustainability. And then also, but to consider also what are the needs and the challenges for people on the ground, and then also work on terms of priority in this direction. So if there is a restoration measures that is providing more jobs than another one, then well, you can consider that it should be a good idea to invest in the first one, for example.
Then
So
you can prioritize this one in the beginning and then focus on other ones later, also when preparing your timeline of implementation.
Just to finish, indeed, there is also for the improvement of the condition of habitats of union interest, so it's quite a very specific case. Then there is also a priority which is proposed to member states, which is to focus on the Natura 2000 areas. That's only for the improvement of the condition of habitats, and if it's not enough, then there is nothing preventing member states also to ensure that other forest ecosystems are restored, of course.
Thank you very much. I hope this is a bit reassuring for some of the participants. Is there any direct response from the panel, or should we move on with further questions? Okay, excellent. Then I have a question to Jenni, and it links actually to one of the objectives that you've just mentioned, Florian, which is ecosystem resilience. So which will benefit then also the people and also the economy eventually, and also landscape recovery, which is one of the targets of the nature restoration regulation. So my question is related to your more practical work, now coming from the EU level to the very practical work on the ground. I'm aware that Ireland's restoration priorities need to balance forest, peatland, and also biodiversity goals, so it's quite complex. What are and I was wondering, coming from the legal level to the level on the ground, what practical measures is your team using to ensure that forest restoration contributes to ecosystem resilience and also wider landscape recovery?
It's a good question, and I've picked out 3 measures that we are using, and the first of those would be to use our national parks, which in Ireland are state-owned and managed primarily for nature conservation. So there's already an overlap in the policy objectives nationally with the National Restoration Plan there. And we are working on certain national parks where we have scope to do large-scale restoration measures. And the national park in the northwest of Ireland in County Donegal is called Glenveigh National Park. And we're using that as a test bed to trial a new approach. And the woodland in that site is quite representative of the types of issues that we have throughout many of our national parks and other state-owned and privately owned properties around the country. There are issues with invasive species and also high numbers of deer, which are suppressing the natural regeneration of trees there. And we are aiming to take a large-scale, landscape-scale forest restoration approach there. And increasingly, as we roll out this project, we're finding benefits that are wider within other habitats and for other species within the area. And the peatland restoration projects that were being undertaken in parallel, we're finding synergies between those. So, for example, when deer numbers or densities are reduced, that can improve outcomes for peatland restoration because you're removing the deer pressure from restored sites. So more and more, we're finding synergies across different projects, and there may be benefits for other habitats. And another approach that we're taking is to address the issue of forested peatlands, which are we have quite substantial areas of those in Ireland. And the situation was that non-native conifer plantations were created on peatlands, raised bog and blanket bog, and the peatlands were drained in order to establish these. But those plantations had very low levels of productivity and some failed completely. So the situation now is that these areas need to be restored. And in cases where forest to bog restoration is technically feasible, peatland restoration is being carried out on those. And on some situations where you have slopes, for example, and it's more technically challenging and less feasible to restore a peatland there, we are looking at the possibility of converting to native woodland on those kind of sites. So that gives an indication of the balance that we're aiming to find between our forest and peatland habitats. And another approach that we're taking is to improve the evidence base for restoration planning. We have a project that was initiated last year, the Ancient Woodlands Ireland project. And that is utilising historic maps. We have a very good national survey that was done in the 1830s and created very accurate maps that show woodland cover. So that is now being digitized nationally for the first time, and it's going to create an all-Ireland inventory of where the remaining ancient woodlands are, but also it's going to show us the areas where there was woodland in the 1830s that has since been lost. So it's going to be a really useful evidence base in helping us to identify forests that are high priority for restoration, but also identifying areas where woodland no longer occurs that may be suitable for woodland re-establishment. So I think that project is going to have some really exciting outputs.
Thank you very much, Jenni. I'm sure there was a lot of inspiration also for participants of the webinar, and particularly also the emphasis on the landscape scale. I think that provides you have a lot of opportunities to actually balance different demands. And when it comes to the evidence base for the restoration planning, I think this is also something we looked into in Superb, and there was a lot of information that we could get from this historical narratives to really learn about how was restoration dealt with 100 years ago, where was forest, etc. And then to kind of pick this up, because in most of Europe, forests have been managed since several decades. So there you can then learn from what has been happening in the past. Thanks very much. We have so many questions also from the audience. I would like to pick one up that links a little bit to the kind of the management of disturbances. And the question is from Portugal, and it links to kind of where conservation should be prioritized, and where management is actually important to deal with disturbances. And the question is asked from the perspective of Portugal, where there is a lot of privately owned forest, which makes it, of course, even more difficult, also with small-scale forest owners. But I know that for instance, Poland, where there's a lot more state forests, but you have experience with disturbance management. So maybe, Lukasz, you can answer the question how to deal with disturbances when you also have to prioritize conservation. How are you doing this actually in Poland? And also maybe which forms of linking to also the question to degradation. How do you deal with disturbances and degradation under climate change and balance the conservation perspective, balance with the conservation perspective?
Yes, thanks a lot. As you said, in Poland, we have a very different situation in the matter of the ownership of the forest than in the Western countries, because about the 80% of Polish forests are under the state forest or non-private ownership. So we have a situation that we have a one policy for all, so for most of the forests in the country. But you know, of course, we faced a lot of disturbances over pressures, biodiversity loss, the fires, which are not so important as in Portugal, for example, or Spain, of course. But I think that what is the most important now in Poland, of course, a part of fragmentation or soil erosion, which is dealt with some management practices, it's the lack of water. We have faced the climate change, with the effect is that we are deriving water from the forest, not only for this ecosystem, but also for forests. And these changes are also accelerated by inappropriate water management. That means that if we want to reverse the situation, if we want to stabilize this problem we have, we must act not only in the forest, but in all the country, in fact. So it's dealt with Article 11 also, when we can use forests as the rewetting areas for rewetting the organic soils. And we are thinking about it. And of course, apart other measures we are thinking about in RP, we are also considering changes in forest law, because now it's not possible in the wide area to make the forest habitat wet and used and managed. And we are going to change it to make it possible for state forests also to rewet a bigger part of the Polish forest. The lack of water is not only important for riparian forest, but even for the pine forest, which is dominating Poland. We have such a problem with Białowieża forest, which is considered last natural lowland forest in Europe. And probably we will start with this area on the Eastern Shield, which is near the Russian and Belarusian borders, as a part of defense politics. And also, we are thinking about these activities and these measures. We are aimed to turn the water into the forest and this area. And of course, we also must remember that the state forest during the last decades, we had the projects with retention, and I think that, of course, it will not change the global problem, but it will stop this process maybe a little bit.
Thank you very much, Lukasz. And indeed, I think the water management is like picking up one of the points that you mentioned. That is also something that is quite crucial in the Mediterranean context.
Not only, unfortunately.
Not only, unfortunately, yes, and it will become a problem, obviously, also in Central and Eastern Europe, or it is already becoming a problem. And when it comes to the law, of course, I guess there are some things that you can change that might also be then relevant for countries where there's much more private forest, because also the private forest owners obviously have to follow the law. I have still a couple of more questions related to the ecosystems, but something very important that has also been mentioned in the Q&A is the question of participation of local communities in the process. And we know from international projects and from outside of Europe and also from inside of Europe that actually citizen acceptance and also inclusive governance are like really key for restoration success. And that is also one of the reasons why the nature restoration regulation foresees stakeholder engagement processes at actually different stages of the NRP development. And my question goes to basically every one of you. What innovative participatory approaches do you know? Have you seen that that actually balance or integrate both ecological priorities and local economic and social interests? And if you have no guiding examples so far, what approaches are you considering now? And I would like to start with Katarina. I know that from one of my visits in Croatia, in Zagreb, they had really amazing public participation in the forest plan development, and a lot of public interest. Obviously, also in cities, that's more common because the city forest is so important as a regeneration spot. But but I was wondering in general, how are you dealing with this in Croatia?
Yes, well, I think that similar to Poland, Croatia's forests are predominantly state-owned. Approximately 25% of our forests are privately owned, and the additional issue we have with private forests is that because Croatia has been historically immigration country, so Croats have been leaving Croatia for centuries, many of those forests we don't even know where the owners are. So we have the issue is two-sided. You have the national or the public forests, maybe we should call them, and then you have the national and the private ones. You mentioned Zagreb, and I would actually start with that. The bigger the city, the more engaged people are. And what we see is, on one hand, that's wonderful, and it works really well in Zagreb. And Zagreb is on the foothill of a mountain that's a nature park, so it's a protected area. And people have a lot of input, some of which is great, some of which is uninformed, so to say, right? So people really do not want to see a single tree cut, even when it needs to be cut for example, safety. And then on the other hand, you have areas where, first of all, maybe there's not even many people living, rural areas, but also they very much depend on forests for survival. It might be a source of wood, it might be a source of firewood. So their approach to forest is already more leaning towards, let's keep using it. And so what we have to find is a very, very nice, fine balance between protecting their interests, which are reasonable, because if you live in a rural area and you need firewood to heat your house, obviously you need firewood. And then also our national interest and European interest of protecting it. And what we've seen through engagement of public is that, as I said, in larger cities, it kind of comes naturally. People are already inclined to participate. And in smaller areas, they really need to be first and foremost educated on why they need to participate. And then additionally, relating to the question from Portugal, then there is an additional issue in the Mediterranean part of the country where forests are also source of risk because they can burn down the whole cities. And we really don't have one singular answer to this, but what I would say is, first, you need to educate the public. First, you need to tell them why it's important for them to participate, and also that they need to understand that they cannot have everything that they would like to, and that sometimes we do need to cut trees. And for example, in the Mediterranean, I'll just use this as a short example. People always ask us, why do we keep planting pine trees when they burn so nicely? And the reason is because they are the first species that can survive on a burnt area. We cannot start deforestation with oak. It will not survive the freshly burnt area. We need to start with a pioneer species. And so already we have this lack of public opinion that is based on lack of knowledge. So first we need to educate them, then we can ask them to join us in making of really educated decisions. And it works really well in larger cities. It works especially well in those communities that are close to protected areas, because our protected areas are also very big in terms of tourism, which is an important part of our economy. So the local population is, of course, inclined to protect protected area because they also benefit from it directly. And also then those that depend for their livelihood, whether it be wood for building or wood for firewood, or even wood as a resource for their animals, because they may be grazing them and so on. So first you need to educate the public, I would say, and then you can accept whatever they have to say, because they already will have modulate their opinion based on their level of education.
Thank you very much, Katarina, particularly emphasizing the need for education. And you need to also make sure that they see an interest, that they see something that is valuable for them in the forest. And I think that is part of the education process that is not a given in areas outside of cities where people do not have an immediate interest in the restoration.
Yes,
so,
and just to add, because you just mentioned it and I forgot to say, they need to feel like what they need from forest is being taken into consideration. If it's firewood, then we need to make sure that we still allow them to use firewood. If they like a certain protected area, then we need to make sure that that protected area is really, really, really taken care of. We need to show them that we care about their opinion. That's what I think. Even to the point of maybe doing less what we would like to make sure that our citizens are satisfied.
Yes, because in the long term, this creates the public ownership, and that's what you need. Lukasz, you have an immediate response to that, and
Yep.
you were the next one to be asked, so that's perfect timing.
Okay,
Go ahead.
Okay, just one word, because during the Superb conference, I had a chance to be in the Leuven. We are discussing about this participation, about the particular forest in this southern part of Netherlands. And what was very important, is in link with this, what Katarina just said, that the same forest or the same area have a different value for different people. So for owner, it is just it's a timber, it's incomes, etc. For another one, it be a place for rest, and for other people, it be a buffer between them and the highway. And education means not only to put the general knowledge, it is important because we must protect it, but during this education to find these different approaches and accept that different people, different local communities can see this forest or this area from the completely different points of view, and they are also important. That's why the finding the compromises and the common approach is so difficult to find.
Yes, indeed. And you can see you get a lot of hearts and clapping hands from the participants. So did actually Katarina. So I think these are really crucial point for also accepting the different perspectives and different needs. I have a bit of a follow-up question, because you have also quite some experience with Natura 2000 areas, and what, from your perspective, how can you actually integrate those different perspectives from forest owners, from local communities, from NGOs in the planning? Do you have some concrete ideas how you're going to do this? And then I will, of course, also ask Jenni.
That's the interesting and challenging question, and very complex, because we are talking about finding the compromises, the building the common approach. And you mentioned Natura 2000 in Poland. Unfortunately, we had a very bad experience with establishment, with designation of the sites. According to the directives, no social or economic, other than scientific basis could be taken into consideration during the designation of the site. That means that also in this process of designation, the position, opinions of the local governments, the local communities were not taken into consideration, in fact, in this process. That's why in Poland the restoration law is also not acceptable by the part of the society, especially the farmers. So that's the question: how to start the process and how it should look like. With the Natura 2000, we started without the knowledge, with sometimes very optimistic ideas about the value of the particular site. So now we decided first to gather all data we have, to address all these gaps in data and find all database we can have in the country. And what was surprised that we were surprised that of course we have sometimes huge gaps in the data even for Natura 2000 sites. But what was surprising that the data we have are scattered between the different databases, which are incomparable. So we cannot compare the data, we cannot put it together because they were created by different authorities for different purposes. And the first step we are now doing is to find ourselves in this mess, in the fact. Because starting to discuss with all people interested in, without this solid databases will be very difficult. So we have support from research institutes, from ministries, from our agencies, and we are trying to have a common knowledge about the base we have. And of course, we are starting also to involve, to engage as wide as is possible. We started with online survey, online questionnaire, dealing with all particular elements of the NRP, which is open to everyone. So everyone is invited to put your proposals, to put ideas, to even propose the measures and areas for restoration. And it's still open and will be open to the end of the process. The second step was done 2 weeks ago with the conference, today's conference, with several panels devoted to the particular articles of NRL, with scientists, NGOs, local governments invited to be part of it. And of course, it was online transmission of this event. And we have a huge feedback from the audience, and we have a lot of questions, a lot of proposals after this conference. It will be also the part of bringing the puzzled picture of the process. And the last element in the future, in the beginning of the next year probably, it will be the public hearings of our project, because we must remember this project in Poland, the NRP, will be accepted by decision of Council of Ministers. So it is obligated to have a public hearings. And I hope that putting all these things together, we will have a project more or less as more or less effect of the common efforts. But I know that it's very difficult to put all these associations, NGOs, societies, local governments together to make one consistent document.
One consistent document.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Lukasz, also for your honesty. It's very much appreciated, because I think a lot of countries are actually struggling. I still have a question to Florian related to the nature credits, which I think is really important also for some of the people here in the room. Jenni, would you have a kind of pretty, I know you can be really sharp. Do you have a quick answer to the question how to kind of balance the different interests? What is your plan there in Ireland? And then I would still like to ask Florian for the nature credits.
So I think one of the main challenges that we are facing is simply the forest history in Ireland, and the fact that our forest management is quite different to most other member states. So we, like most European countries, that statistic that Elisabeth presented earlier, at about 6,000 years ago, we had 80% forest cover, but intense deforestation occurred in Ireland, and at 1900 our forest cover went down to about 1%, so extremely low, and we are now back up at about 12%, but the majority of that is non-native conifer plantations, predominantly Sitka spruce, and we have about 2% cover of native broadleafed woodland. And when we look at the targets of the National Restoration Plan, this presents some particular challenges because our re-establishment targets for our Annex 1 forest habitats are unusually high because there is such a gap between the current area of forest cover and the what's called the favourable reference area that we are aiming towards. And the 25 years up to 2050 begins to look like a very short time period when you when you look at it in terms of what would need to be achieved each year. So we have a real challenge ahead of us, looking at the targets that we're aiming to achieve, but also looking at the current capacity that we have and the current rates of afforestation. So that is going to be a particular challenge for Ireland. But there are also major opportunities here. The opportunity to carry out large-scale restoration with multiple benefits is enormous, and the National Restoration Plan gives the impetus for that to happen. But in order to enable that, we need funding to scale that up to the right level. And
Perfect.
That brings us to another challenge.
That is a wonderful, actually, that is a wonderful introduction for Florian. Florian, you have 2 minutes to introduce the nature credits, and then you will get 1 million emails after that. And before you answer, I just want to say big thank you to Elisabeth, who is in the background answering 25 questions in the Q&A. Thank you very much for that, Elisabeth. That is amazing. Okay, Florian.
Yes, so indeed, the funding of nature restoration is one of the key challenges that were discussed during the negotiations, but also now during the implementation. So there is the usual line to text that we're saying is that there is not one fund for restoration, but plenty of possibilities to provide funds for restoration, including under the current MFF, so with the CAP, the cohesion, regional funds, the LIFE, for marine ecosystems, there will also the MFAF. We have also Horizon 20, so with the Superb, you can see the kind of projects that can be funded under Horizon 20 and how it can be useful for the implementation of the nature restoration regulation. Most of these instruments are quite traditional public instruments, and for sure, most of the funding for biodiversity is and will remain based on public funding. So the EU is really committed to strengthen the public spending, the public investments on biodiversity. This being said, we also know, and that's not a surprise, nor at the EU level, nor at the international level, that public funding cannot fill all the financing gap, which is huge. I think it has been estimated to 37.4 billion of euros per year across the total EU, and at the international level is 20 times this size, $700 billion per year. So there is not a lot of solutions to explore about that. And if there is not enough public money and that we still need to do this investment, that means that we need to invent ways to channel private funding in restoration. It's not a crazy idea, meaning that there is a lot of private interest or business cases that can be built on private investments into biodiversity, be it to reduce the exposure to nature-related risk. I think this one is the most credible and still yet to be operationalized. But when you see that restored ecosystems is less prone to wildfires, to floods, to drought, there is some economic interest behind that. And the first economic interest is also from the insurance companies that will pay less damages. Then there is also the way to structure or to strengthen the ecosystem services which are key for the supply chains. Then how to offer also nature positive products and improve the sustainability reporting, the attractiveness. So there is various business cases that can be considered when we're speaking about private investment into biodiversity. The issue is that there is a lot of challenges to create and to materialize this private funding. And that's why at the Commission we have launched this roadmap towards nature credits. We're not saying that nature credits will be the perfect solutions for everything. It's just a new tool in an existing financial toolbox, which includes payment for environmental services, green bonds, de-risking, branded finance. So there is a lot of financial approaches that can be considered, but we believe that there was a need and an opportunity, at least a potential, for nature credits to appear in this EU ecosystem, EU financial ecosystems, as a way to value and to reward the investments into nature positive action, especially restoration. Not only, also the maintenance of ecosystems in good condition. So we're really trying to expand the scope as much as possible to cover, for example, sustainable forest management or close to nature forest management, but also all the maintenance of ecosystems in good condition and also after, meaning that when you're restoring an ecosystem, there is some provisions to ensure that there is no significant deterioration. So then we need also to conceive these financial approaches in a way that on the long term, it can continue to deliver reward, remuneration for the land stewards, be it farmers, foresters, land managers, and others.
Thank you very much, Florian. I'm sorry, and we need to come to the final words now.
Yep.
I think we should do an exclusive webinar about this topic, because I know a lot of the landowners who are joining actually this webinar are very concerned about that. So I hope they know a little bit more, but I think we should dedicate more time to also particularly this question in the future. Now we have time for one sentence from each panelist about what would you actually recommend, or what is your final recommendation for those who develop the natural restoration plans right now? One sentence. Who wants to start?
Okay, I will start if you can. One sentence, it will be difficult,
Yes.
so I will do my best. Knowledge, dialogue, best solutions put into life, and unfortunately, a lot of time for all these elements. That's one question, one sentence.
That was perfect. Thank you, Lukasz. Jenni, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I'll go next. My suggestion is to think big. So aim for large scale and look for multiple benefits.
Perfect. Katarina.
Yes, connecting to Jenni, I would say it's called National Restoration Plan, but do please think at least regionally, if not continentally, because nature knows no boundaries. Your forest turns into your neighbor's forest.
That is a beautiful European perspective as well, which leads me to Florian as the last
Yeah,
key takeaway.
I will just say, don't be afraid of the nature restoration regulation. It's not only an obligation, but much more importantly, it's a chance to reinvent our relations with nature, and most obviously also to show that restoring nature is the most useful investment we can make in Europe's future.
Thank you very much. I can see a lot of hearts and clapping hands from the audience. So I think they liked your final statements. I also want to thank the wonderful questions I want to thank the participants for the wonderful questions in the Q&A. Really amazing. It's a pity we couldn't answer them all. But maybe there's a chance to follow up. And now I hand over to Helga.
Thank you very much, Gesche, and thank you very much, all panelists, and also thanks a lot for Elisabeth for the inspiring talk. With this, my concluding remarks will be so short because I think everything was said at this moment. I would just like to thank you for participating in this ThinkForest event. And please stay tuned. We will have more of these events. And we at EFI would like to thank goodbye. Have a lovely day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation. Very useful.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very
Thank
much
you.
for coming. It was fantastic. I felt sorry that it ended now because there's so many other things that we could have
We
been.
could have talked 2 hours more, yeah. Next time.
Excellent.
Have a
Thank
great
you so
day.
much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Have a
Bye.
lovely day.
See you
Thanks.
next
Bye.
time. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.